Shalom, everyone. My name is son of Israel, Yahweh, and I like to serve you forever as I pray something very soon. It is now a privilege and honor to present to you the sons and daughters and now of Yisrayl now entering the sanctuary. I now present one of the sons of Yisrayl, Buffalo Bill Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated, and may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. My title today is Fear. Now, Yahweh gave us emotions, and one of those emotions is fear. Now, we all have this emotion, this thing called fear. Now, fear can help us or it can hurt us, depending on what we allow. Fear can help keep us safe or can influence us to run from our responsibilities. Please turn to Exodus 20. It's on page 61. And look at verse 20. Exodus 20:20. Then Moshe said to the people, "Do not fear, for Yahweh has come to test and prove you, so that the reverence of Yahweh would be with you, so that you would not commit sin." See, look at that. You're not the only one this ever occurred to. Moshe is warning the people not to fear, not to run. He's teaching them to be strong and to deal with these tests, the opportunities set before them. Let's turn to Revelations 21. Revelations 21. On page 985. Look at verse 8. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and the whoremongers and the sorcerers and the worshippers of gods, Elohim, and all liars will have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Now for those who gave in to fear and didn't listen to Moshe, those who ran from their jobs, this is what they can expect. This is why Yahweh warns us about fear. Let's look at Matthew 10. Matthew 10. It's on page 737. Matthew 10, and look at verse 28. And do not fear those who can kill the body, but aren't able to kill the spirit, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the spirit and body in Gehenna. Now Yahweh has given us the answer, the perfect way of learning how to handle our emotions through the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. In the Self-Control Unit, we are taught that emotions are strong physical and mental responses triggered by what we experience. A trigger is something that starts a process. The emotion fear is defined in the Peaceful Solution as an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by the anticipation or awareness of danger. You know, I think that's when I would run to the House of Yahweh, not away from the House of Yahweh. Yes, praise Yahweh. Fear is 33:72, and Strong's is defined as to be afraid, to be frightened, and also to revere, to respect. In some contexts, it relates to terror. In other contexts, to honor, respect, and awe, actually reverencing Yahweh. So in conclusion, Yahweh says, do not fear, do not be frightened. They are trying to scare you from the house of Yahweh, but be strong and brave. Yes, and honor and respect Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. And with that, I'll turn it over. You'd all stand. turn it over to Sonny Abel and Nian for prayer.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Today I would like to speak on the subject of be strong, be brave, because Yahweh is in full control. Now we need to remember that. Yahweh is in full control. So let's start off by turning to the book of Exodus. Exodus 20, and it's verse 20. It's found on page 61. Exodus 20, verse 20. And it says, Moshe said to the people, do not fear, for Yahweh has come to test and prove you, so that the reference to Yahweh will be with you, so that you do not commit sin. Okay, so the word strong, the word strong in the Webster's New World Dictionary, Volume 1, means having greater force, not weak, powerful, and able to last, durable. And the first definition there, it said having greater force. Now, the force I'm talking about, it's not with a sword or a fist. It's, if you remember, the pen is mightier than the sword is an old adage. And I looked it up on Wikipedia, and it says the pen is mightier than the sword is an adage indicating that communication, or in some interpretations, administrative power, or of an independent press, is more effective than direct violence. And this has been used a couple of times. And if you're once, the Islamic prophet Muhammad is quoted as saying, the ink of a scholar is holier than the blood of a martyr. And also, Thomas Jefferson, on June 19th, 1792, he said, go on then in doing with your pen what in other times was done with a sword. And also, Joseph Smith, he's a writer, and he said, the word has a greater tendency to lead people to do which was just, is more powerful than the minds of the people than a sword. Okay, so also the pen is mightier than the sword. Okay, so we as the House of Yahweh, we don't use a sword to lead people. Okay, and Yahweh, we use Yahweh's way. We don't use a sword to control people. We use Yahweh's way, which is self-control. Okay, now if we could look over to the book of Hebrews. Book of Hebrews. It's on page 945. It's Hebrews 4 and verse 12. And it says, it's found on page 945, and it says, for the word of Yahweh, the law and the prophets, is living and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even into the vision of body and spirit, and the joints and marrow, is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Alright, so the last definition I gave for strong, it was able to last, durable, and tough. Now we must be durable, and this, we must be durable in order to remain in the house of Yahweh. Remember, we're going to remain in the house of Yahweh, and we're going to stay in our place. But Satan does not want us to remain durable. And if we look over to the book of Ephesians, it's found on page 918. It's Ephesians 4 and verse 14. And it says, no longer are we to be tossed to and fro and carried by every wind of doctrine, but by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, but whenever they lie in wait to deceive. Alright? So, brave in the Webster's New World Dictionary, Volume 1, means willing to face danger, pain, or trouble, not afraid and full of courage. Now, Satan, this is not what Satan wants. She wants us to back down. But we as the house of Yahweh must not allow this to occur. Okay, if we could look over to the book of Yeshua, it's found on page 178. 178. Okay, it's Yeshua 1, and let's start off with verse 6, found on page 178, and it says, "Be strong and courageous, for you will lead these people and enable these people to inherit the land that I promised an oath to their forefathers to give them." Notice for verse 7. It says, only be very strong and courageous. Be careful to obey and observe, and do all the law which Moshe my servant gave you. It says, do not turn from the right hand nor to the left, in order that you may succeed wherever you go. If we also look down to verse 9, it says, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened nor become discouraged, for Yahweh your Father is with you wherever you go. Okay, and if you remember, if we could turn over to Exodus, but in the meantime, Pastor, he has talked about this many times in his sermons about being strong. And in the first book of Yisrayl, chapter 5 and verse 124, he says, you have no excuse, brethren. Not even a child has an excuse for not believing what the house of Yahweh is bringing at this time. He says, I love you dearly. I love all of you. May the peace of Yahweh be with you, as well as I would like to see your love for Yahweh and his servants. I want to tell you, you're going to have to be very strong in the future. The part I did not get to in this deception that is going to be brought forth here in the next few months, coming forth from this beastly system. If you are not sound in this doctrine, brethren, Yahweh says you will turn. Yahweh says that is it. So be strong and keep your mind on this sermon. Keep playing these sermons to yourself. And Pastor says here, I love you. May the peace of Yahweh, or may Yahweh bless you. Shalom. And also in the first book of Yisrael, chapter 5, and it's verse 107, he says here, Isaiah 35, verse 4, he says, say to those who have fearful minds, be strong, do not fear. Behold, Yahweh, behold, your Father will come with his judgments. He will bring forth his judgments. What does it says is what it mean? It means you with recompense for not reverence against people who are waging these wars. So he will come and save you out of this thing. So Pastor's been preaching for us to be strong and to remain strong and not to give in to the temptations of this world. But if you remember in Exodus 14, and this is found on page 56. Let's start off with verse 13. And this is after the children of Israel came out of Egypt, and it says here how the Egyptians, they were coming after Israel at that time, and it's verse 7. It says, verse 6, he says, he made ready his chariots and took his army with him. He took 600 of the best chariots along with other chariots of Egypt and the officers who were with them. And skipping down a little bit, it says, verse 10, it says, and as Pharaoh approached, the children of Israel looked up, and behold, they were Egyptians marching after them. They were terrified, and the children of Israel cried out to Yahweh. Alright, and let's skip down to verse 13. And he says, and Moshe said to the people, do not fear, stand still, and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will not see them again, no more forever. And skipping down a little bit to verse 21, it says that, and Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind that all night, and made the sea into dry ground, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued them, going after them into the midst of the sea. All Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen. It says, and in the morning Yahweh watched, looked upon the army of the Egyptians, threw a fire, and the pillar of fire and cloud, he threw it into confusion. And he made the wheels of the chariots become jammed, so they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for Yahweh fights for him against the Egyptians. In verse 26 it says, then Yahweh said to Moshe, stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, and upon the chariots, and upon their horsemen. In verse 27 it says, so Moshe stretched out his hand over the sea, and when it was morning it appeared that the sea was returned to its full depth, and the Egyptians were fleeing into it. So Yahweh overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. And the water flowed back on and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the children of Israel into the sea, and not one of them survived. And it said, but the children of Israel walked upon dry ground in the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. So you can see there how Yahweh, that shows how Yahweh will protect us. And that's only if we keep the laws of Yahweh. So with that, everyone please stand. I'd like to turn it over to the next speaker, the great Kahan Kifa Reynolds Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You all may be seated, and may the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. I apologize, I had to bring a small library with me today. But, as I was preparing the sermon and, listening to what the sons of Yisrayl just spoke about, I mean, it's incredible how Yahweh does this every week for us, how he puts everything in order to where one thing just leads to the next. But, in preparing for this, I wanted to present information that, can prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that the work of Yahweh, this work is being completely guided by Yahweh. We have, as some of the previous speakers, mentioned, we have nothing to fear. Yahweh is in complete control, and we have the proof to show it. We actually have the proof here in the House of Yahweh showing the progression of this work from the beginning. But the title of the sermon is The Work of Yahweh Will Be Made Prominent While the Work of Satan Perishes. And that's what we see taking place right now. The books, the booklets, the prophetic words, the newsletters, all the books of Israel, they show absolute proof, undeniable, absolute proof of the history here in the house of Yahweh, that Yahweh is guiding this work and that his foresight can be trusted. And the foresight of the great witness Israel can be trusted. We don't have to be in a situation where we're doubting the information that comes forth from the house of Yahweh, or I have a plan B in case this doesn't work out. We got to remove all that doubt from our mind. And the way that we do that is we have to educate ourselves in the information that's already here. We don't have to go out and search for something new. It's already here. We just have to go back and read it. And read it with a believing mind to where we can really allow this information to sink in, because it'll act as a defense. It'll make you stable if you were familiar with it. But in preparing for this, I wanted to bring out some of this information that's already been printed here. And one of the books, I don't know if y'all remember that one, The End, right? This was published back in 1998, and on page 25 of this book, if I'm holding it right, let me see if I could zoom in a little bit so everybody can read. I know you probably didn't bring the end with you today, so I'll make it to where we can all read together. But the Catholic Church has incorporated many events involving many different nations to bring about this plan to completion. You know, and it's talking here on page 24, this 7-year active plan. And there's a lot of details that Pastor puts in all these books for us to pay attention to. And we need to pay attention to it. Because, you know, what's been unfolding is so clear that the only way you don't see it is if you don't know what's inside these books. Because it's you know, like he set up before and said, this is exactly what's going to take place. And lo and behold, this is exactly how it takes place. Well, he says the same substance of this plan, now remember we're talking about this 7-year plan, the same substance of this plan is to be used later in an attempt to bring peace to the world under a one-world religion and a one-world government. Okay, so back, and much earlier than this, but this is just one example, but way back when, you know, our overseer was well aware of what the Catholic Church is doing today. And he wrote about this in order for us to be aware, so when it did come to pass, you know, we weren't caught off guard. You know, we've been warned plenty far in advance. But, you know, we think, well, how did Pastor know this? Well, if you go back to Daniel, and probably start there. This is Daniel and Daniel 8, and this is found on page 680 of the book of Yahweh. Daniel 8, and we'll look at verse 23. And he says, "And in the last days of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their fullness, a king of fierce expression and of dark understanding, understanding dark sentences, will stand up." And notice the side notes here, because this is really important that you catch this. The fierce expression. If you look at you see the C and the D, the side notes here. The fierce is force, and expression meaning immoral. So there's actually what he's prophesying is someone who brings about forced immorality. Odd. How did he know this? Well, and of course he says, we'll stand up. Now, in E, if you read that, he says, now, this is what we're seeing arising now, the New World Order. The New World Order, that they try to say, well, you know, we don't really have a plan, that this is conspiracy theories when we talk about the New World Order. Yet they mention it all the time. And even a couple weeks ago, an article had come out on July 8th that the Pope is calling for a new economic world order. And you could see, you know, a lot of his plans in this. It's really kind of out in the open. If you're aware of what you're looking for, he's pushing this thing very strong here. But on the nuclear baby, another book. Here we go. The nuclear baby on page 122. Let me put this here so we can all read that together. He's talking about the Crusades here, and talking about in the scriptures that say, you know, let us be like the first beast. Well, how was the first beast? You know, he said that in the Crusades, the popes took the lead in preaching. This is what started the Crusades. You know, Pope Urban II here. He said he'd come out and said he urged all Christians to forget their local feuds and unite to rescue the Lord's Supplicer from the Muslims. Okay, that was Pope Urban, and of course that launched the official Crusades, right? Well, what's taking place today? The Pope to Christians. Put aside your divisions amongst persecution. And what he's saying here, this is very, you know, just like the prophet told you here, this man's very skilled in trickery and dark sentences. But he says all Christian churches to put divisions aside and concentrate on what unites us. There's nothing that unites them. To be on the record here, they have no unity in them. The only temporary moments of unity that they have is in hatred or persecution towards somebody who's trying to practice righteousness somewhere. But there's no unity that would ever link this group together and make it work. You know, they're founded upon hatred. They're founded upon the disunity. But he says, the blood of today's martyrs makes us one. Well, and he's referring to there was 21 people killed there, Coptic Christians in Egypt. And he's saying, well, because of that now, we all need to unite. All of us Christians, we need to unite. Well, what are they going to unite for and all that? I thought it was also interesting on the next page. Here you have another article, and I'll try to zoom in a little bit on that. I like this one better. Pope Francis' popularity declines here in the U.S. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is? Well, I go back to the title, and I'll probably mention this several times. The work of Yahweh will be made prominent. Okay? I don't know how many people are familiar with the word prominent, and I'm going to leave that as a homework assignment for you to look up. But I first noticed it, a while back, looking up a word, and I saw that, and it's very descriptive about the work of Yahweh in these last days. But the work of Yahweh will be made prominent, and while you see the work of Satan perishing, it's falling. There's this falling away. People are starting to see it for what it is. And of course, they would have never done that unless somebody had been exposing it, right? Well, this is the great, comfort that we take, knowing that we are here, part of this work that is exposing these works of darkness for what they are. But in Isaiah 42, let's turn there real quick. Isaiah 42:9, and that should be found on page 556 of your book of Yahweh. Isaiah 42:9. And he says, behold, the former things have come to pass, and new things I do declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. This is so you understand and know that Yahweh is far in advance than any of the works of the gods. We don't have anything to fear. When we look around, and like I said, the more you look for it, the more you'll see it everywhere, that we've been warned 20, 30 years in advance on everything that's taking place today. Yahweh, and really, we've been warned several thousand years in advance, but it took the witness to actually put this into terms to where we understand it. None of us had, a King James version before we came to the House of Yahweh and thought, I understand this whole plan from my King James version here. I've got it. I don't need anybody to teach me. No, we did. We all needed this teacher to show this to us, but it's so plain once he actually does. And that's what I want to get in everybody's head. We have to mentally prepare ourselves for what's coming because it's here. It's not in the distant future. It's here. These things are in motion right now, and we've been, forewarned a long time in advance. But did you know that the House of Yahweh, and talking about the 7-year peace treaty, the House of Yahweh is the only people on the face of the earth that understand this, that actually understand that this peace treaty and all the various parts of it, because there are Christian groups out there that understand that there is a 7-year agreement. Some of them are still waiting for it. They say, I think the 7-year agreement might start now. You could follow people like that if you want, but it's really like, the scriptures puts it best, like a dog returning to its vomit, It's that disgusting to see somebody who's been presented with the truth go back to some kind of stupid information like that. What exactly are you looking for? It's been so well documented here in the House of Yahweh that you'd have to just be illiterate and ignorant of the information to not understand it. And that's on us. The witness has warned us, so it's on us from here on out, what we do with that information. And of course, if you want to turn back into that mire, you can. But let's go to Daniel here and look exactly what's taken place. Daniel 9. It's really exciting to see these prophecies unfolding, because we've been looking for this for so long. But in Daniel 9:27, and he will confirm with many, he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of that week, he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. And instead, he will cause the prevalence of the Lord of heaven, even until the destruction that is determined will be poured upon the desolator. And of course, that desolator is this religious system. You know, and this is what's taking place. There is a destruction determined, and that covenant, when you think of a covenant, this is a binding agreement. You know, it's not something that can be just tossed aside. They're bound to this agreement. Okay, and only the house of Yahweh knows this and all the details. And it's very clear once you start making yourself familiar. But, you know, Pastor wrote about this in the 70s, and the house of Yahweh witnesses actually take place in September 13th of 1993. It actually went into effect of October 13th of 1993. We all need to know those dates. Well, you know, why do we need to know those dates? Well, because the deception is very thick. Brethren, it's very thick in this world. And if you allow yourself to go back into it, you're going to be deceived. You know, you're going to be deceived, and you're going to miss out on the greatest work that's ever taken place on the face of the earth. And having a front row seat, you know, being an actual part of it. That's the exciting thing. You know, because we all do have a part in this work. But the deception is thick in the world today, and it's getting thicker, just as Yahweh told us that it would be. Now, we can clearly see that we are in the time of the end. And remember the information, you know, last feast. I was so excited. I say last feast. I'm talking back in Tabernacles. I was excited, you know, when I heard this information brought forth about us going into the last 3.5 years. You know, because this is a time period we've been reading about and for so long. And understanding what took place, I wanted to document it, you know, because I've always liked history, and the problem with history is that the historians get conquered by the ones taking over, and you don't get the actual picture of history. So I thought, you know, at this point, I want to document how this takes place, because this is really a remarkable thing that's taking place in these last days. Well, so I got a notebook here, and I want to show. I'm going to have to zoom out. I want to show the notebook because I just, you know, Walmart has these sales for these binders, and I grab like 30 of them at a time because they're real cheap. So I grabbed this one. I said I'm going to use this one just for recording, you know, what's taken place in this last 3.5 years. And I noticed that, you know, the cover was black, so I thought it was like fitting for the dark days ahead, and you know, and everything. And I've seen all these you got the 70 sheets for the 70 weeks, and there's 3 7s in the item number here. I don't know if you could see that or not. But I noticed right away, this one had 2 covers. It came this way with 2 covers. So, you know, and right away I realized the 2 works going on in these last days. Well, we have a purple work here too, you know. Praise Yahweh. But, you know, what I did is I just started documenting, you know, different things as they would come up. And I put it on a timeline, which is way too big to put in the screen here. But what it was is timeline of events that took place right at that time. And I did this to show because it's very clear what's been taking place. I mean, that this is not, you know, just something that came and went and nothing took place. If you remember, October 13th, 2014, okay, this would have been during the Feast of Tabernacles, that the British Parliament, what they did is that they had a vote a symbolic vote to actually recognize Palestine as a state. If y'all remember that was brought out during the feast in detail, right? At the same time, the Pope made this word that was, they said it was the word heard around the world, exagliarity. Forgive my Italian pronunciation. I'm not very great at that. But he said the Italian word heard around the world, and what it meant was welcoming. And what it was talking about was homosexuals. And that took place on that day. Now remember that there was a big stink on the Temple Mount at that time, and there was a lot of things that came to pass because of that. The Israeli cabinet there, they decided to kind of sack the whole thing and have a re-election. And during that time, Benjamin Netanyahu had to run for re-election again, even though he would have still been in office for a couple years. Well, he did win the election. Well, a lot of things took place in that lull of a time period here. And remember, and this also was brought out, that exactly 7 months after that day, another thing took place. And I'll need the 4th book of Israel for this one. And I know, again, this was brought out, but I want to refresh your memory because how significant this is. Now, this was back in 1988. The reverence of Yahweh, and this took place on 5/13/2015. This was exactly 7 months after that. And Pastor was talking in this sermon here. He says, in order to recognize Palestine as a state, they must make Jerusalem an international city for all religions. And of course, now what has the Pope been pushing? This unity of religions, this international city. And as a matter of fact, he did that on that very date, recognizing Palestine as a state. A month and a half later, it becomes even larger, and that itself is documented. So, I want to bring all those things up because those are the types of things that you have to keep in mind. Because otherwise, if you don't pay attention to detail, you miss the big picture. This is all very clear what's taking place, and they got the right people in their places to where they can actually move on this thing. Well, deception. I'm going to get back to the nuclear baby in verse 122, or on page 122. This is very important because you see how the deception comes about. Pope Urban II appealed to men's political and economic lusts. Okay, and he used this as a means to get his actions to take place. And what you see in the world today is the same type of thing, that emotions are used as a form of reasoning, which is, if they had a 4th grade education, they would have stopped this. And I say 4th grade education because this book provides the 4th grade education. This is the 4th grade Peaceful Solution Teacher's Manual, right? Let's look here in verse 5. Emphasize to students, let me get it to where you can read it. Emphasize to students that self-control is about making the right choices. Sometimes our choices are based on our emotions and not reasoning. Reasoning is the act of thinking things through. Well, when things are presented in, as the great son of Israel was talking today, in fear and these types of methods, people throw reasoning to the side and they begin to act impulsively on emotions. And that is a great method of deception. When you look at deception, it can really be somewhat defined that way as using emotions to convince people of doing something that's irrational. It's illogical. And emotions are huge in this beastly system. Well, no one in the house of Yahweh should ever fall for anything like this. But if we go to Hebrews 3:13, I wanted to lay down the work of some of these things. And we could go forever on the information that's already been brought out in the house of Yahweh. But I wanted to show some of these proofs so that you can understand these things, and then you could see the power of Yahweh and how absolute in control He actually is. This is not something that is just randomly taking place. But in Hebrews 3:13, I want to get to something else, because here in the house of Yahweh, we have to realize these prophecies are coming to pass. We have to understand that this is the called out body of Messiah right here that we look at every day. And we can't get sidetracked with our disputes with one another, with our emotions in the way that we deal with one another. And this is a very, very serious thing, because as these things flare up, it opens a gateway to deception. You know, if you have a root of bitterness, you are going to be deceived. Okay, so we have plenty of safeguards for this, and I want to get into the book of Hebrews there, and chapter, this is on page 944, chapter 3, and verse 13. But exhort one another daily. Exhort one another daily, while it is still called today, so that none of you may be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. You know, we owe that to one another. You know, we owe everything that we owe to ourselves, we owe to one another. You know, and we've got to quit attacking one another. You know, nobody in the house of Yahweh should ever feel that their work is unappreciated, that they're somehow, you know, less or at a certain level than anybody else, you know. We didn't learn that from our overseer. I guarantee you that. You know, I remember when I came here back in 1997, and, you know, I was totally clueless of everything, I think, at the time. You know, no skills, no nothing. But I remember this in the world, how there was people who looked at other people judgmental, and I was never comfortable around those people. I would always kind of associate myself with the people on the bottom, because they weren't all weird like that. You know, the people on the top, they always had this outlook that, you know, they would the type that come in and, you know, and pay you no attention, right? So it's like they were up there, and it didn't really bother me, but I just I would just know I'll leave them alone. They're all strange like that, you know. When I came to the house of Yahweh, you know, I met the most prominent, important individual on the face of the earth for the first time. There was absolutely no trace of that in his character, not anywhere, you know. When I met him, you know, he looked at me like I had value, and I think it was like the weirdest thing, because I'd never experienced that before. I like, this is strange, you know. But as the years went on, I saw this great character in this man, you know, and how everybody has potential in his eyes. So that's our example. You know, we're not getting to the kingdom on our own, right? So, you know, Yahweh put this great example in front of us, and he said we have to become like that, right? So that gave me great encouragement, and I've tried to emulate that. You know, I've tried to always look at that example when dealing with others. How would Yisrayl Hawkins deal with this situation? You know, how many times do you maybe walk into a place and a certain individual comes up and you think, oh, brother, here we go again. Not that one. You know, we can't look at each other like that. You know, how would you feel knowing that Yahweh put that individual here, and this is the outlook you want to have? You know, we've got to put things in perspective. Satan would love to get us all mad at each other, but guess what? We're not going to do it. You know, we're bigger than that. We're stronger than that. This is the house of Yahweh, and we are going to fulfill the prophecies that are spoken of about the house of Yahweh. And the house of Yahweh will be prominent. The house of Yahweh will succeed. And the gates of hell will not prevail against this house. Now, praise Yahweh, it's up to us to show what part we have in that. You know, and every day is a new set of circumstances to where we can prove that to one another. You know, to Yahweh, that we are here to help build the house of Yahweh and not to tear it down. Okay? Praise Yahweh. If you all please keep that in mind, because, you know, as the week went on, actually earlier this week, I had to go out of town to look at some work, and I was on the Highway 36. I don't know how many people are familiar with that road. It's kind of a nice one because it's not like Interstate 20 where there's cars all over you. You can, you know, you could drive in stretches for a long time without seeing a vehicle. And I went where I was going to go, and I was heading back to Abel, and just kind of driving down the road, and I saw real clear in the sky, the word age. And it was like, I've never seen a cloud look that clear before in my life. It was just like almost typeset in a cloud. And of course I'm driving, so I always sound like I see these things when I'm driving. I promise. I'm not looking at the clouds when I'm driving. But, as I was driving, I looked straight up and there it was, right? So I looked at the clock real quick and it was 2:30. And I was fumbling around and I didn't have my phone next to me, and I didn't, want to give too much attention to looking to the phone while I was driving. So I kind of slowed down and pulled over, but by then it was gone. The words had switched around, and it was just something that's been on my mind all week. So later on, I did end up looking at the word 2:30, because that's really all I had to go by. Actually, not all I had, but that was one of the big things. And remember, it was the word age, all right? In Gesenius here, I want to just look up that word 2:30, because this is very interesting here. Hopefully, everybody can read that. It says, "The word has gone out from me, and what I have said is ratified, and will not be recalled." If you look at the Greek word 2:30 in Thayer's, Greek word 2:30 is truly of a truth. I don't know if you can see. There we go. Most certainly. So the reason I thought that was so pertinent to this whole topic is that the plan is set in motion. This is Yahweh's plan. He's not going to relent on it. He's not going to turn it around and stop it. Okay? And remember what the witness told us last week? There's nothing left to prove for these courts. Does everybody remember him saying that? Praise Yahweh. So what did he say? The only thing that that could possibly be is if it's waiting on one of us, some of us. And it's up to us to encourage one another and to see each other through. It's time for us to stand up and do the work that we were called here to do. And that's we're here to bring forth the man, right? Praise Yahweh. Now, we can see these things, taking place in the world very clearly, and let's look back to Isaiah, because he gives so many clues here. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to show was that word 2:30 in Gesenius. It gives a couple scriptures here. Someday I'll get the hang of this. It gives a couple words here. This is Daniel 9:23. And Isaiah 45:23. Okay, it says what you can compare this word to. So I want to go to Isaiah 45:23, because this is really encouraging. When you see these things take place, he says in verse. Actually, let's read verse 23. He says, "I have vowed by myself. The word is gone out of my mouth in righteousness, and will not return, that to me every knee will bow, and every tongue will vow an oath." So this is what's really taking place right here. This is the surety. It even says in the next verse, "Surely in Yahweh is righteousness and strength. To him will men come. And all who will be increased or incensed, angry against him, will be ashamed." Okay, so don't allow yourself to be one of the ones who are ashamed. Think about these things. Think about when I saw that, I went back to this placemat here. Everybody could see the placemat. Yahweh gives us reminders. Pastor didn't want to give us a bunch of placemats because we're sloppy. We might be that too. But, these things are reminders so that you can look at them and consider. Because this is a miraculous thing that was done for us. And Yahweh wants us to see it. Okay, because when we see it, you can't walk away and not understand the significance of what Yahweh is doing for His work and for His house. You know, we have everything right before us, but of course right now we're under pressure, and you know, Satan's given her best effort trying to make it look like there's nothing for us to look forward to. You know, woe is me, I'm poor, I'm this, I'm that, this hurts, that hurts. You know, okay, and we do suffer those types of things. But remember what the great apostle told us, if you turn over to Romans real quick. And let this be your mindset in Romans 8:18. You know, for I consider, this is found on page 879, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time that I was just talking about, and they are extreme at times. You know, they are, sometimes you just feel like you're about to break. You got to keep the goal. You got to keep the finish line in sight. Know where you're going. For I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which will be revealed in us. Okay, that's what we have in store for us. And it's not in the far distant future. You know, this isn't something that's going to take place 30 years from now. This is now. It's right around the corner. We're there. You know, so it's don't, you know, when remember, we're running a race. And anybody who runs a race knows that the time to pick up the pace is at the end. You know, a lot of people get off to a great start and they run, and as they get close to the end, they get tired and fatigued. And then the ones who save that energy for the end, they pass them up. They pass them up. And Satan has been trying to mentally attack and wear down and fatigue this house since it was established. Okay, but now is the time for us to speed up. Now is the time for us to get excited, because we could see the goal in front of us. Look, in verse 19, for the earnest expectation of creation waits for the revealing of the sons of Yahweh. For the creation was made subject to emptiness, not willing, but by the will of Him who subjected it in hope. Now the world has no hope. They have no knowledge. They don't know how to solve a problem. You know, you can easily look at the news today and see that every small problem escalates out of control because no one knows how to stop it. You know, we've been privileged to be given this information. You know, I don't know how many people have seen that you know, the video that woman who got arrested, you know, this week in Texas. And that was the one thing I looked at it and just thought the whole thing could have been avoided. You know, the entire thing. But nobody knows how to de-escalate a situation. So every little problem escalates into a full-blown conflict. And you see that on a city level, and you see that with nations. They don't know how to stop. And all these books that I brought today, if you go back and read them, that's what the witness Israel told us 30 years ago was going to take place. He said they're going to get to a point where they're going to destroy themselves. Okay, and it's very clear what's taken place. You know, we weren't at all left in the dark. Let's turn to Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, and let's look at verse 22. Yes, Hebrews 10, verse 22. Let us draw near with a true heart, full of assurance of the faith. And of course, we build that assurance of the faith through all these studies, through understanding what's taking place. We have this great assurance, having been sprinkled from an evil confidence. There's another thing that the world has no idea about. And our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of the faith without wavering. Okay, so this is what we're being tried for right now, whether or not we're going to waver. Because Yahweh has given us this time to build up this strength. Now, if we haven't been doing it, when we get put to the test, we're going to fail. Just like anything else, you know, if you don't prepare yourself in advance, when you get put to the test, you're going to fail. So the house of Yahweh warns us, don't allow yourself to get into this condition. Prepare yourself every day. Remember what the law teaches us. Talk about it when you rise up, when you walk down the road, when you see somebody. When you see other members of the house of Yahweh, let this be on your mouth, in your mind. Let this be the conversation that we talk about, and not the foolishness of this world that's passing. But look at verse 23. For he who promised is faithful. And that is the great consolation that we have. Yahweh is not a liar. Everybody in the world is a liar, and Yahweh is not a liar. The Pope is a liar. Everything he's promising is a lie. He doesn't have the power to fulfill a single promise that he's made if he ever had the intention of ever even doing it. He doesn't even have the know-how and how to do it. He could talk about peace. He could talk about helping the poor. But, that's all it is. It's talk. It's lies. Lies upon lies. That's what we've been inheriting in this world. Well, we didn't get that here. And we should have full confidence in knowing what it is we're working for, who it is that's guiding this work. And we see that more and more. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. But it's up to us to feed ourselves with this information so that we're not caught off guard. Because this is a very exciting time that we're in right now, brethren. Very exciting time. So if you keep these things in mind, you're going to be joyful as the next couple years go on in the great work of Yahweh and witnessing here at the house of Yahweh the prevalence of the house of Yahweh and the demise of this evil system that we're never going to allow to creep back up again. So with that, I'm going to collect my library here, and I'm going to turn the services over to a great priest in the house of Yahweh, a pillar in the great house of Yahweh, the great Kohan David Heimerman Hawkins.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's an honor and a privilege to address Yahweh's, the called out ones of our Heavenly Father Yahweh in these last days. You all may be seated. And of course, we're all under the authority of our High Priest Yeshua, and we're seeds of Yahweh's last days witness, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. What an honor and a privilege to have that headship over us. The title of the sermon today is The Quartet, Will They Succeed in Bringing Peace? And it does have a subtitle, Loose the Four Angels Bound by the Great River Euphrates. So if you could all be turning over to Revelations chapter 12 to begin with here, Revelations chapter 12. And while you're going there, Yahweh's last day's witness, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, has taught extensively regarding the quartet, which are United Nations, the United States, the European Union, and Russia. This group of four was formed to bring peace to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The inspired Holy Scriptures refer to the quartet as the four angels, which are bound by the great river Euphrates. So if you've, and I'd like to show you the Prophetic Word magazine here. Okay, if you look at the lower right-hand corner, this is the January 2011 issue of Prophetic Word magazine. The pastor asked the question, the quartet, will they succeed in bringing peace? So if you've gone to Revelation chapter 12, let's begin by reading verse 7. And there was war in heaven. Micaiah and her Malachim fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought with her angels. And verse 9, the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. She was cast out into the earth, and her angels were cast out with her. And of course, this occurred near Passover of 1997. Hail-Bop dropped off the adversary here on earth. And look at verse 12 here. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them, but woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil is come down to you, having great wrath, because she knows she has but a short time. Now this short time is its own event. It's not the shortened time regarding the length of the tribulation. And so I'd like you to look at this first slide here. Everybody read that okay? Okay, it says, now this is a transcription from one of Pastor's sermons that he gave April 10th of 1999, and he said, these are Pastor's words, I brought out the apparition where Satan said she was given 10 years to bring peace. She said, we will have some slaughter, she said, and because God is angry, she said, to appease him, I will keep him from destroying everybody, and these are Satan's words, or the words of the apparition, and it will be just a slight punishment, and then we will have world peace. Notice, world peace. That's her goal. That was her goal through the quartet. She said she had been given 10 years to do this. Revelation 12:12, where it shows she is cast down and she is angry because she is given this short time. Now we have, Pastor says, we have these notes here that says because one of the authoritative books we used showed that this means short time. And if you're in Revelation chapter 12, you'll see the side note here, which is our next sheet here. Your notes there say this short time is a span of 10 years. Hebrew, yom, traditionally translated time. A Hebrew and English lexicon of the Old Testament by Brown, Driver, and Briggs shows this word is correctly translated 10 days. But when a day is mentioned in prophecy, Yeketsky 4:6 shows that a day represents 1 year of actual time. Therefore, Revelation 12:12 is saying that when this prophecy begins to come to pass, Satan will have only 10 more years to prove that her false way can work. So I'd like to now get back to the quartet. This is from Wikipedia. This, in a pictorial view here, it shows what the quartet was all about. The Mideast Quartet, designed for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And you see two hands shaking. The hand on your left with the blue flag, that's the Israeli flag. And the hand on the right is the flag of the Palestinian Authority. So the Mideast Quartet, they were formed to bring this peace process, they called the Oslo Accords, to completion. This is from Wikipedia. It says the Quartet on the Middle East, or Middle East Quartet, sometimes called the Diplomatic Quartet, or Madrid Quartet, or simply the Quartet, is a foursome of nations, international and supranational entities involved in mediating the peace process in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Quartet are the United Nations, United States, the European Union, and Russia. This group was established in Madrid in 2002. Actually, it was established before that, in October of 2001, and I'll show you that later. Recalling the Madrid Conference of 1991, as a result of the escalating conflict in the Middle East, Tony Blair is the Quartet's current envoy. So the second slide here on the Quartet. Okay, this continues from Wikipedia. Despite the significance officially attached to the Quartet's part in promoting the peace process, many of its statements are merely repetition of previous statements, and no significant changes in policy either by the Israeli government or the Palestinian Authority have occurred. So this is sometime after the Quartet was established, this was written. In December of 2012, Palestinian officials declared Tony Blair's job and the Quartet he represents as useless, useless, useless. That's how the Palestinian looks upon the Quartet. The next sheet here, this is another report that you can find on the internet. It's put out by the Brookings Institute, so you can go to brookings.org, and if you have a printer and a full cartridge of ink, you can print out this 70 or 80 page report. But This is an interesting, this is a cover sheet from the report, and it's done by the Sabin Center for Middle East Policy at Brookings. And it's analysis paper number 25, February 2012. So written February 2012. But notice the title of this report. Pretty much says it all. The Middle East Quartet, a post-mortem. The Middle East Quartet, a post-mortem. And the author is Khalid El-Jindi. So let's look at the definition of post-mortem. Post-mortem, it's a noun, and it's an examination of a dead body to determine the cause of death. A synonym would be autopsy. So this report is really documenting the failure of the quartet to bring peace to the Middle East. It's a documentation that they have failed to bring peace to the Middle East. Not necessarily a documentation that the quartet members are dead. Of course, they're not. But it's kind of a summary of where the peace process and the quartet are at. And this next sheet here is from this report. It says it has been 10 years. Okay, now remember what we read about the short time. It has been 10 years since the most powerful players in the Middle East peace process, the United States, European Union, Russia, and United Nations, came together under the diplomatic umbrella known as the Quartet. Formed in response to the outbreak of the Second Intifada in late 2000 and the collapse of peace negotiations a few months later, the Quartet appeared ideally suited for dealing with the seemingly intractable conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. Its small but powerful membership allowed it to act swiftly and decisively, while its informal structure gave it the flexibility needed to navigate crises and adapt to changing developments around the world. Just continuing from the report, the Brookings report, yet despite the high expectations that accompanied its formation and some modest success early on, the quartet has little to show for its decade-long involvement, a decade is 10 years, in the peace process. Israelis and Palestinians are no closer to resolving the conflict, and in a few instances in which political negotiations did take place, the quartet's role was usually relegated to that of a political bystander. Meanwhile, the quartet has failed to keep pace with the dramatic changes that have occurred in the conflict in the region in recent years, particularly since the advent of the Arab awakening. Having spent most of the last 3 years in a near state of paralysis, and having failed to dissuade the Palestinians from seeking UN membership and recognition in September of 2011, and even that date is significant, the quartet has finally reached its limit of its utility. That's a diplomatic way of saying the quartet has failed to bring peace to the Mideast. The third and final sheet here on the Brookings Institute report, coincidentally, October 2011 also marked another major milestone in Middle East peacemaking, the 20th anniversary of face-to-face negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians at the 1991 Madrid Peace Conference. As the quartet concludes its first decade and the peace process concludes its second decade, both may now be facing the most critical challenges yet. After years of virtual paralysis, the group's failure to dissuade the Palestinians from seeking UN membership and recognition in September of 2011, or to restart negotiations since then, may be the clearest sign that the quartet has finally outlived its utility. Again, the peace process has failed that the quartet was trying to achieve. I just have just a short sheet here on the Madrid Conference of 1991 because I thought it was an interesting note to history here. The Madrid Conference of 1990 is where the first bilateral negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And the results of the conference here from Wikipedia, it says the bilateral Israeli-Palestinian negotiations eventually led to an exchange of letters and the subsequent signing of the Oslo Accord on the lawn of the White House on September 13th, 1993. So that's where the process started and ended up with the signing of the Oslo Accords. So the answer to the question on the Prophetic Word magazine, the quartet, will they succeed in bringing peace? No, the quartet has failed to bring peace. The quartet, as a catalyst for peace between the Israelis and Palestinians, is dead. Notice that the peace process is dead, not the quartet itself. Its members are out there doing their own thing. So what was the quartet's 10-year attempt to bring peace? So go back to Revelation chapter 9, or chapter 12, Revelation chapter 12, and look at verse 9. And that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. She was cast into the earth, and her angels were cast out with her. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down unto you, having great wrath, because she knows she has this 10 years, this short time to bring peace. So she hit the ground, came to earth with hail bop in spring or Passover of 1997. Took a couple years to get her feet on the ground. After you're traveling for a while, it takes you a little while to get acclimated. And so then she picked up with the quartet on October of 2001, and we'll see that. So Satan's attempt to bring peace in October of 2001, Satan's inspired the creation of the Middle East Quartet, and Satan worked through the quartet for 10 years trying to bring world peace, starting with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Her goal was to revive and promote the peace process that was started with the signing of the Oslo Accords on September 13th, 1993. So the 10 years given to the quartet to bring peace has failed. Satan, having failed to bring peace, she will now try to destroy mankind through warfare. This next slide This next sheet here, Revelation 12:12, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil has come down unto you, having great wrath, because she knows she has but a short time, 10 years to bring peace. So looking at the dates here, October 1997, Satan cast to the earth. October 25th, 2001. This is a date that is kind of off the radar screen with respect to the quartet, but this in Wikipedia describes October 25th, 2001 as the first time that the four members of the quartet got together, and they got together with Yasser Arafat, and they tried to convince him about support the ceasefire and the security reforms within the Palestinian Authority. So that was their first actual gathering as a group, October 25th, 2001. Then the following year, May of 2002, they established a permanent forum working together. July 16, 2002, the quartet publishes the roadmap for the two-state solution. Then September of 2011, October 2011, these were their last gasped efforts to get the peace process started again, and they failed completely. So then, February 2012, the Brookings Institute report indicating that the quartet's efforts to bring peace are dead. The Oslo Accords, as we know, as Yahweh's last days witness has documented, and he was looking for this, and he knew it, he recognized it when it came to pass. Signed September 13th, 1993, went into effect a month later, October 13th, 1993, the start of the times and a half. And so Daniel 12:7 is on the screen there. Then I heard the man clothed in linen, which is Yahweh's last day's witness, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, who on that future day, this day, these last days, is teaching, when he held up his right hand and his left hand toward heaven and vowed by him who lives forever that it will be for a times and a half, when Yahweh will have accomplished pouring out his power through his holy people. All these things will be finished. Okay, so how long is a time? I think we would all agree that a time is 7 years. A time is 7 years. So a time being 7 years, so Daniel 12:7, it will be for a times and a half. So now let's read that as if it were Hebrew. Let's read it backwards if you want to talk about chronological order, in the order of time. So reading it backwards, it will be for a half a time, it will be for times, and it will be for a time. And what is the half time? The half time occurred from October 13th, 1993, the Oslo Accords going into effect, until Netanyahu stopped the peace process 3.5 years later. This is a documented event on April of 1997. 3.5 years. And then we entered into the times. Times means 2 times, 7 times 2, 14 years. From April 1997 to April of 2011. And then we entered into the time of trouble, the last 7 years, which is called the Great Tribulation. And it's the time that Yeshua said, unless those days be shortened. Unless those days be shortened. So in Daniel 12:1, and at that time will Micaiah stand up, that great ruler, which is Yahweh's last day's witness. He is standing up, and he's bringing Babylon down through his teaching. So, and at that time will Micaiah stand up, the great ruler who stands for the children of your people, and there will be a time of trouble. It doesn't say a half time of trouble. It doesn't say times of trouble. It says a time of trouble. 7 years of trouble. The time called the Great Tribulation, such as never was since there was a nation to that time, and at that time your people will be delivered, every one who is found written in the book of life. So the time of trouble, Daniel 12:1. This is the last 7 years of this age. This is the time that Yeshua spoke about when he said, unless those days be shortened, and that's Matthew 24, verse 22. So from April 2011, the beginning of the time of trouble, this last 7 years. Now, so then you had in March of 2013, which is 23 months for those who are looking at the numbers, and 23 months after the start of this time of trouble, you had Pope Francis, the son of perdition, takes his office of Pope in the midst of the week. And he's appearing in the midst of this last time, this last 7 years, in the midst of the week. Daniel 9:27, and he is the servant of sin. He's revealed by being elected Pope and by the things he's doing to bring abominations and fighting against all holiness in the world. 2 Thessalonians 2:3, until he is made to appear in the midst of this last time, this last 7 years. And then, So he was elected actually March 13th, inaugurated 6 days later, March 19th, and the scriptures say he's given 42 months, which is 3.5 years, to make war against all holiness. 42 moons. So Yahweh's last day's witness, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins, is the priest who teaches peace at Abelin. The Nimrod system that rules the world today and the Catholic Church, who rules over the kings of the earth, have failed to bring peace working through the quartet. The result of the world's choices and the rejection of Yahweh's 613 laws of peace is that the world has now entered into the time of trouble spoken of by the prophet Daniel. And if you want to turn to Daniel 9, verse 27, the great Kahan Kifa read this morning already. I'd like to read it again. Daniel 9:27. And he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, 7 years, and in the middle of the week, in the midst of that 7 weeks, the midst of that week, he will cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Instead, he will cause the prevalence of the Lord of heaven, even unto the destruction that is determined, will be poured out upon the desolator. So the first half of the week was the first 3.5 years of the peace process, when it was active and they were moving towards the completion of the peace process from October 1993 until April of 1997, 3.5 years. And then the peace process was shut down, April 1997, by Netanyahu. And Daniel, the second part of Daniel, after the sacrifice and oblations were stopped, what occurs next? He will cause the prevalence of Pope Francis to appear. He will cause the prevalence of the Lord of heaven, even until the destruction that's determined that Francis would bring, and that his way would bring, would be poured out on his own head. You know, Pastor refers to it as Rome burning. And so that's the peace process has been shut down from April of 1997 until Francis appeared on the scene, and the second part of Daniel goes into effect here. So the second half of the week, March 19th, 2013, until September, until the end of Francis's 3.5 years, when the destruction comes upon his own head. So I'd like to read from the book of Israel here. This is Pastor's words from the first book of Israel, chapter 2, page 10. He says, "If you remember, it stayed in operation for 3.5 years. The 7-year peace treaty was signed September 13th, 1993. And then he says, verse 11, the 7-year treaty stayed in operation for 3.5 years. Then Netanyahu stopped it. He said it was detrimental to Israel." And verse 14 of the first book of Israel, chapter 2, page 10, Pastor says, "If you remember, I brought out that this was a 7-year plan of action. That was the first thing I brought out in this plan. It was a 7-year plan of action, different events that had to take place over a period of time. I said once this plan is signed back into action, the clock will start ticking, bringing in the last 3.5 years. This is the same 3.5 years that Francis has given to make war against all holiness, which is known," Pastor continues here, "as by all the prophets and all the apostles as the end. It's not a day, it's 3.5 years. It's a 3.5-year period that will bring an end of man's government and of the people and by the people." So I'd like to look at the next sheet here. This is from the first book of Israel. It's chapter 4, verse 74, and it starts out with verse 27. Of course, that's Daniel 9:27. "And he will confirm a covenant with many." That word "many" there is Rabin. "He will confirm this covenant with Rabin for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he will cause the sacrifice and the oblation, all the effort they're putting into bringing this peace process to pass, to cease. It stopped. We have sermons explaining these two words, and to cease. Instead, he will cause the prevalence of the Lord of heaven, which is Francis. He is the abomination that makes desolate. He's the son of perdition. Or, as Yeshua said, the Lord of the heavenly habitation, which was translated by Daniel in other places as the abomination that makes desolate. We saw with the Supreme Court ruling, that they themselves are doing the will of Pope Francis. I didn't hear one word out of Francis saying, "Hey, I don't agree with those guys." I didn't hear one word from Francis that he disagreed with what the Supreme Court decided here in the United States. Even until the destruction that is determined. The destruction, Pastor continues here in this last sentence, the destruction that is determined is the nuclear war that will take place in that last 42 moons that is given in Revelation chapter 11 and Revelation chapter 13. This is from the 6th book of Israel, chapter 3, verse 126, where Pastor wrote, Benjamin Netanyahu was the prime minister after Rabin. After Rabin was assassinated. Netanyahu was the next prime minister, and he said this peace plan was detrimental to Israel, this peace plan was detrimental to Israel, and he stopped it. Stop your oblations, stop your sacrificing to this plan, is what Pastor writes here. It's worthless, and we're not going to do it anymore. So this, Benjamin Netanyahu shut it down. This was an event, a documented event. 3.5 years of trying to put the peace plan in operation, and it was stopped. So this next slide. A lot of words here, but this next one, and we talked about the time of trouble. This last 7 years, it'll be a half time, a times, and a time. And I talked to Pastor about this, and he said, we're looking for events to show the prophecies coming to pass. I put together this list here of events showing that the time of trouble started, this last 7 years started Passover 2011. The first event, earthquake 9.0, Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. The world is still suffering from that, and they will for generations to come. The next event, this is from Wikipedia, this date, the start of the Syrian civil war. Loose the 4 angels bound by the great river Euphrates. The next event, which is just the time, it's the start of the time of trouble, the last 7 years. This was 17.5 years after the Oslo Agreement went into effect. The next event, signs from heaven. Overseer Yisrayl Hawkins sees the donkey cloud. So the signs from heaven began in this last 7-year period. And then the next event, 10 years given to Satan to bring peace, expires. It ended. Their first meeting was October 25th, 2011. This is 10 years later. Satan's time to bring peace expired. She failed. 10 years given to Satan to bring peace expires. The next event, signs from heaven. 2 teachers see the SHDHF, end of the age cloud. That Hebrew word shadaf, it means to scorch. The earth is going to be scorched with fire, the nuclear burning. The next event, February 2012, the death of the quartet report, the Brookings Institute, loose the 4 angels bound by the great river Euphrates. The next event is 528, large double rainbow, seen here at the House of Yahweh, and there have been several seen since that time, which means Yahweh will, and the Apostle Kepha said, the end of the age is going to be by fire, not by a flood. Then, in 9/27/2012, pastors rush to clothe us all in gold attire, followed by the purple. So the change in attire began in this time period. And then the election of Pope Francis, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, elected 266th Pope, 3/13/2013. 6 days later, Pope Francis, the king number 8, the man of sin, the king of fierce expression, the son of perdition, inaugurated into the office of Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. Pope Francis is made to appear in the midst of this last 7 years, 2 Thessalonians 2:7, in the midst of the time of trouble. So if you want to turn to 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 1, 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 it says, "But concerning the times and the seasons, brothers, you have no need that I should write to you." And we're well aware of the times and seasons. Pastor is continually making us aware of the times and seasons and the urgency of the times and the seasons we're in. Verse 2, "For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of Yahweh so comes as a thief in the night." Yes, to those who aren't looking for it, who are not aware of the prophecies, it will come as a thief in the night. "For when they say peace, true peace," now I remember when the Oslo agreement was signed, they said, "Shalom, shalom, peace, true peace." They said it at that time. It was documented that it was said at that time. "For when they say peace, true peace, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape." So this next sheet here, it says the quartet has failed to bring peace. The war in the Middle East begins. Revelation 9:14. It says, "Saying to the sixth Malach, which had the trumpet, loose the 4 angels." Now, this 4 angels that are loosed are the quartet. The quartet, the Middle East quartet. "Loose the 4 angels, which are bound by the great river Euphrates." So they were bound in unity. They were bound in purpose. They were trying to bring peace to the region of the Middle East. They were bound to try to bring peace. They were trying to work in unity. Revelation 9:15, "And the 4 angels, the quartet, were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a moon and a year, in order to slay a third part of men." If you read, the news articles, the amount of death and destruction in the Middle East, particularly Syria and Iraq, and now it's overflowing into Turkey. And pastors also documented that they're using nuclear weapons in this war. Tactical nuclear weapons, yes, they're small, the small firecrackers. The big show hasn't begun yet, but they are using nuclear weapons in the Mideast. So this word bound here, it means to bind, and I say in unity. They were bound loosely in unity. I shouldn't say loosely, but they were trying to be in unity to bring peace. They're trying to work together. And the word loose here, if you have that sheet on your screen yet, loose, it means to loosen. It also means to break up, to dissolve, and to destroy. And that's essentially where the quartet has gone since they were formed 10 years ago. Actually, it's been, 14 years ago? This next sheet here, this is from the Brookings report on the quartet, a post-mortem. I just picked out some of the highlights here, which kind of show the connection to this prophecy of loose the quartet, which is bound by the great river Euphrates. The first paragraph there, it says, "The intense disagreements over the quartet principles which almost caused the group to break up, only added to a sense of confusion regarding the mission and further undercut the quartet's standings. The next one, the quartet's loose, found it interesting to use the word loose there, informal structure has been a double-edged sword. While the United States typically has worked closely with Israel, it has been less bound, there's the word bound, by the need to cooperate with the quartet's partners. Just the last part of this next paragraph here, it says thus the two actors that seem to have derived the most benefit from the quartet, the United States and Israel, are also the ones that are least bound by it. Indeed, the group has become deeply divided. There's that loosening, loose the quartet, loose the four angels, deeply divided on nearly every critical issue it has taken up since its creation. In a process of becoming all things to all people, the quartet has ceased to be anything at all. In this last paragraph here, it says the current mechanism is too outdated, it's dysfunctional, and it's discredited to be reformed. Instead of undertaking another vain attempt to reactivate the quartet, the United States, European Union, United Nations, and Russia should simply allow the existing mechanism to go quietly into the night. So here's a map. Here's a map of the Middle East. Now, actually, it's a map of the section of the Middle East showing the Euphrates River. If you look up here, there's three countries that are bound by the great river Euphrates. There's Turkey in the north, there's Syria, and there's Iraq. The Euphrates River, it's formed, it begins in the mountains of Turkey in the north, up in this area, and it flows down through Syria, and it flows down through Syria, this is Syria, and down through Iraq. So the area of the Middle East which is most affected by the current destruction is Syria, Iraq, and Turkey is becoming more involved in this all the time. Turkey just had a suicide bombing incident this past week where 30 young people were killed by a suicide bomber. Okay, Revelation 9:14, loose the four angels, the quartet, which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Revelation 9:15, and the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour, a day, a moon, which is a month, and a year, in order to slay a third part of men. The word in that. In this verse, we can all identify a day, a month, a year, but the word hour. How long is an hour? You know, if the quartet was loosed in Passover of 2011, well, how long is an hour? Now, if you look at this area here on this, it says an hour. Now this definition was taken from the description of Yahweh's last days house, the Philadelphia era, the house at Abelin, under Yahweh's last days witness, Yisrayl Hawkins. An hour in Revelation 3:10 says, I will keep you from the hour of temptation which will come upon the world. You know, Pastor, in his writings, he described the most terrible time of this great tribulation to be the last 3.5 years, which is the time we're in now. If you look up the word tribulation, it means pressure. Pressure. Anybody feeling any pressure? You know, pressure from everything going on in the world. And, you know, so this is a time when, as the great Khan Kifa said, we need to be strong, and we need to uplift each and every one of us, so that we can keep serving Yahweh. So the hour, Yahweh is going to keep us from this hour of temptation, which is coming upon all the world. This 3.5 years under Francis, when Francis is making war against all holiness. So if we think in terms of this hour here in Revelation 9:15, an hour and a day and a moon and a year, it's actually the longest time component of those four things. So we have a day, 1 day, a month, 30 days, a year, 365 days, an hour, 3.5 years. So this comes out to about 4 years, 7 moons, 7 months. You add this time to the death of the quartet, October 25th, 2011. It brings us into next year. And Francis, he's in office for 42 moons. Yahweh is going to give him every second of that time to prove that his way can't work. Yahweh gave the quartet the 10 years to prove, or Satan the 10 years to try to bring peace. She didn't do it. And he's going to give Pope Francis his 42 moons. He's just going to do it. It'll never be said that if I'd have only had another month or another 7 months or another year, I could have done it. No, Francis, you've got 42 moons to war against all holiness, and that's it. You're done. Let's turn to okay. So let's turn to Matthew chapter 24, verse 21 and 22. Matthew 24, 21 and 22, that's correct. For there will be great tribulation, and yes, we are in the great tribulation, brethren. In fact, we're in the worst part of it, the last 3.5 years, such as has not come to pass since the beginning of the world to this time, nor will ever be again. And unless those days be shortened, there would no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. And you know what? From the start of this last time of trouble, it was 23 months, and then Francis appeared on the scene. Just like it says in Daniel 9:27, he's going to appear on the scene. 23 months into this last time of trouble, he appeared. But he's going to get the next his 42 months, which he started on March 13th, March 19th of 2013. So this fall, when Francis addresses Congress here in the United States, he's got 1 more year left. 1 more year. But don't think that we've got 1 more year left. There's a lot. Remember, Pastor said nuclear burning is going to come upon Francis's head. And the 10 horns that he's working with now, these 10 religious powers, are going to work against him. So, we don't have all that much time left. For my final scripture here, if you could turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And let's look at verse 1 and verse 8. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 1. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to love, and we see that the love of the world has grown cold. There is no love in the world. And a time to hate, and we see that the hatred is building among the nations and among the people in the world. And notice, a time for war and a time for peace. The quartet tried to bring peace for 10 years. They failed. What we're in now, brethren, is the time for war. And so, buckle your seatbelt to your chair in the house of Yahweh and hang on to to the zeitzeits of Yahweh's last days witness, Yisrayl Abel Hawkins. May Yahweh bless your understanding. And I'll turn it over for closing prayer.